Hello, world, and welcome to the Innovation Coaching Podcast. My name is Klaus Rostel, and with me today I have Victor Van Doorn. Victor, tell me how I can help.
Thank you. Nice to see you here, Klaus. So I find myself in an interesting position where um, one of my companies we are closing down, and we've waited too long, I would say, to make that decision. So it's also a bit crunchy, a bit difficult. The interesting position and the reason why it makes it, or why I'm a bit more easy to talk about it, is that it's not been my main company for many, many years. My main focus for 10 years now, actually almost about to have an anniversary there, has been Sherlocked, a mystery experience design company. That's the path through which I know you and the College of Extraordinary Experiences. But before I started Sherlocked, I founded a company called Uncover, and the thing that the incarnation, the manifestation of it that has been in existence for over 10 years now was a tattoo shop for objects, an engraving studio, a laser engraving studio where people can bring by their objects to personalize, or they can buy stuff to personalize there on the spot. And we had a team of graphic designers, always one like on the spot can help you to make your tattoos for your objects.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a really fun concept, and in the beginning we got also a lot of attention because it was like an experience retail concept. Um, and then I got a shiny new thing, which was Sherlocked. And then our manager, who was managing the store, Seam, was so capable that he could just manage the team and the business without me, and that went really well. I would say between 2014 or late 2013, even when he started, up until COVID. And then in the pandemic, we had to close down, and we took on um, debt on the taxes side, and debt by letting ourselves be supported by the government, which turned out that we needed to pay back because we were not quite in bad shape enough. We were too successful in crawling back right after. And then we had to pay that back, had to pay back tax debt. And also the clientele seemed to have gone down. And one of our main products, which was aside from the tattoo shop for objects, but under the same brand, was the carving out of the Apple logo out of MacBooks, so that DJs and CEOs could have their own logo or symbol light up in the dark when they were on stage. Those two were the only two demographics that we served with that very niche product. But anyway, that one, because of the new way that Apple made their screens, started making their screens a few years ago. There you go. That was no longer possible. Both these moments, the pandemic hitting and the MacBooks no longer being uncoverable, with 2020 hindsight, would have been great moments to stop. And now we've racked up some more debt in the like small stuff, like it's like 10,000 euros in open salaries that now maybe I have to be personally liable for. I don't know, but yeah, the lesson I'm taking away from it is that if something's not thriving, then seriously consider just stopping it, because other things can thrive. Anyway, it made me very curious about your experience with Jobak. And this is the first time I'm stopping a company, at least in this context, where there's a puzzle to be solved. And I haven't heard too many people with this experience share their experience about it. So I wanted to ask you if you wanted to share something about your experience, and if you have any advice or questions for me.
Oh, how lovely. I both get to talk about massive failure on my part, which is good, and there was plenty of it. And somebody might even learn something. That's the best.
Nice.
Thank you, Victor, for allowing me to talk about myself and highlight how big an idiot I was, which I was, and somebody might even learn. That's beautiful. So, first, a little context for those of our listeners who don't know that. For many, many years, I was the CEO and founder of the world's largest live action role play studio. And if somebody wants to debate that title and say you weren't the biggest, you were only number two, fine, fine. One of the world's, right? We're in a tiny space. We were big ducks, but it was a tiny space. And I managed to crash that spectacularly because I was very good at vision. I was very good at communication. I was very good at building dreams and making people feel empowered and creating insane experiences. However, I was less good, to put it mildly, at running a business and understanding the underlying financial side, the business models, the numbers, all that sort of stuff. And when I started learning, it was already bad. And then when we tried to make it better, we took some gambles that did not go well, and then we gambled some more. And then now we were at a place where it seemed like, let's just gamble some more. We're down already.
Yeah.
And when it finally crashed in March 2019, I had gone out and borrowed a lot of personal money, not government money, but personal money, personal loans, and owed the taxes some money, and ended up, when the whole thing crashed, I sat with a personal debt of just under 1 million euros that I was liable for every single penny of, and I had to call all my creditors, everybody. Those were not nice calls, and some took them better than others, but most were tolerant, and say, I've got no money and I owe you a lot, and I'll give it all back to you.
Wow.
But it's going to take me time because I need to go earn it. And some of that debt was at 17% interest.
Whoa.
Yes. So I had essentially two options. I could either roll over, be happy that I live in Denmark, which has bankruptcy laws and has free healthcare, and I could still have a great life while just being permanently in debt and slowly paying off a little bit of it, but generally, like, this would be my life from now on. That was option one. Luckily enough, I could still have a great life, not financially great, but it could still be nice, even with that. Or there was the other option of saying, okay, I'm going to start paying it back. Then there was option three, which was just tell everybody to go to hell, but that seemed to me like a bad option. I did not like that option, so I didn't put it on the table. So I had to do all these calls with people and say, there's money, you're going to get money, but it'll take me years. And also a piece of context, before 2019, my best year ever, was making roughly 40,000 euros pre-taxes. And now I owed just about 1 million.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that I was used to making money and now I needed to pay it back. I was used to making no money and now owing a lot of it. And just the interest on the money would be more than I had ever made in a year. That was my starting point.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, that was fun. So the positive side of that was I've learned how to make money.
You were forced to.
And I had creditors who were nice enough and kind enough to say, we trust you, Klaus. We think you made stupid decisions, but we trust you still. So we're going to be patient. And the few that didn't were few enough that I could deal with that. There were a little bit. My ex-wife and I sold our apartment and we got rid of that.
Cool. Wow.
That helped a little bit. And some of the events I was doing, I handed off to others, and that made a little bit of money, but it was still, that could cover like the ones who didn't trust me. And that meant I was left with a lot of people who were still tolerant and still accepting and supportive, but who just would like their money someday. Now I just needed to learn how to go out and get it. And the reason I say this is that since then, that debt has come down, depending on how you calculate it. But the way I usually calculated, I've knocked off more than half of it, which is a decent amount. It's 5 years ago.
That's very impressive. Exactly.
And it's a little bit more than 500,000 knocked off the debt, plus some interest that has also been knocked off. So that's positive.
Yeah, including COVID years, which followed directly after that.
And I've also been lucky enough that I was able to, for many of the people who said, I don't care where the company money comes from, because I borrowed it to a company and you're personally responsible, but you can pay it off however you want. So I was able to take some of that had come in and help pay it off like in efficient ways, which was very nice. So people were happy with solutions that made sense, and some I could work off a little. And in general, they were supportive. So my first thing to anybody who owes money to people, anybody who's crashed, anybody who's burned, is pick up that phone and make those calls. It's going to be painful, but it's generally a good idea, because either they will say, I have no forgiveness, I have no acceptance, I don't care, it's your problem. And then you can at least say, yeah, I don't care about you anymore. And then you can deal with what you can do. Or they'll say, you know what? I understand that sometimes things go wrong. I've got your back.
Wow.
And then suddenly you're in it together.
Yeah.
And whether that means, I had some people who were nice enough to say, you know what, if you never pay off that money, maybe it was 2,000 euros, maybe it was 5,000. For some it was small, for some it was bigger. And said, you know what, if I never get it back, that's okay.
Yeah.
I'd like it back, but if it never happens, that's not going to ruin our friendship. It was just a weight off my chest.
Yeah, I can imagine. Was anyone in a position to completely forgive the debt?
Yeah, several.
Wow.
Small creditors, but several. But there have been some also bigger creditors who've said, I'd like you to put me last.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Cool.
And then I created a newsletter, which runs to this day, where I every like 2 to 3 months generally write out to all of them saying, here's what's happening, here's what I'm trying, here's the mood, here's what's been going on. And then usually some of them read it and they're like, okay, he's still alive.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And some of them write back and say, keep fighting. And then some of them write and say, hey, I really need to do that kitchen restoration that I actually had the money for it. It's now been 3 years. Can you find me some extra? And then I juggle.
Yeah.
So by retaining control over it, I've been able to work on like a little bit of a mixture of ability and need and what was doable with very understanding people, because I've always kept them in the loop.
Yeah. Like a reverse Kickstarter.
Yeah, a reverse Kickstarter. Exactly. A reverse kick, and not being shy about writing, this feels terrible. And saying, maybe I'll have to stop some of the ongoing payment deals in 3 months. I'm not there yet, but I might need to, because then people can react.
Yeah.
And of course, people would like their money. Who wouldn't? I have people who owe me money, and one of them just disappeared, and I haven't heard from him in nearly a year. Is he still alive? Is he gone? Is it like, and that's not a good way to do it, because it doesn't make those who need to be patient with you more patient. So that would be my first advice is, one, make those calls, even the painful ones. Two, keep people in the loop as much as you can and be transparent.
And proactive.
And proactive and transparent. Three, there is good stuff in bad stuff. There are a couple of things that have come out of this that would never have happened. Number one is I've learned how to make money, and let's be honest, I probably wouldn't have otherwise.
Wow.
I've learned how to make serious money, which I would not have done otherwise, because I had to do uncomfortable things. I had to say, okay, I've managed before to make 40,000 a year. My old dream was, if I could just make 60,000 euros in a year pre-tax, then that would be like, Klaus would be happy.
Yeah, but then that wouldn't cut it anymore.
Then I looked at the math and said, yeah, that's not working. That's not going to cut it. That's barely going to keep up with the interest. And that's before taxes, right?
Yeah.
Like, if I need to do something, it needs to. And then I said, what if I charge a shit ton of money for my services and see if it works? And it was scary. The first time I told somebody, yes, I cost 5,700 euros for a day of consulting. That was scary. The first time they paid, I was like, ooh. The second time, it was less scary. The 10th time, it wasn't scary. It's not that everybody said yes, but getting to the point where you're willing to take that chance, right? And I'm not saying set the house on fire so you don't worry about the small stuff, but if the house is burning already, then maybe it's time to tell somebody you love them.
Yeah.
And maybe it's time to redecorate the kitchen anyway, right? If it's on fire, you might as well do something radical.
How would you translate this to someone who's not in this backed into a corner? Not for me, because I am in a tiny version of the situation, but for people listening, how do you get yourself to that urgency that the filter is so tightened that only the big picture, the big strokes matter? You focus on that.
You get there by thinking, I don't want to be that guy.
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend, good friend, known him many, many years. He called me up. This is a couple of years back. He called me up when it was like a year later. So things were improving, but it was still completely terrible. And he called me up and said, Klaus, this is going to be a weird call, but I feel my situation right now is shit. So I want to talk to you, because after that, I'll feel my situation is less shit. And I loved him for that honesty. I loved him for that honesty, because it meant that he knew that if he felt sad for himself, he just had to look at me financially, and then he stopped feeling sad for himself.
Oh, that's another reason to have this podcast, so you can be a cautionary tale, inspiring big picture thinking.
Yes, and somebody can think, oh, I don't want to end there, so let me start while I still have options.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We all can act when we're desperate. When we get told we have an illness that gives us 6 months to live if we don't change, or if our marriage is breaking apart, or if our kids don't speak to us, or our business is just crashing, we can all act when it's too late.
Yeah.
The tricky thing is what makes us act when it's not too late, but still needed. And that is, in my experience, that's that emotional hook. And one of the things that we're best at as humans is relating to other humans. Right? There's nothing that makes us tell our loved ones we love them than meeting somebody who said, I lost my dad yesterday.
Yeah.
I told him I was going to see him on the weekend, and I didn't have time. And I wish I had. Just for me, this is just a made up story, and I'm still crying, right? You can't see it, and maybe they can't hear it, but I just that thing that started a bit of tears. And that's just a silly made up example. But it means that when you hear that, when somebody hears that, especially if it's real and not just Klaus making up a point, then it's pretty simple for most of us to say, you know what, I'm going to go home and call my dad. And I'm going to do it not tomorrow. I'm going to do it right now. Right. And that, I think, is one of the powerful things about other people, is that when they're successful, we can emulate them or be inspired by them and sometimes hate them a little because we like it to be us. But when they're unsuccessful, we can be reminded and that we're lucky, we're privileged, we're happy. We still have time, we still have power, we still have opportunity, right? Before it's too late. I really need to pull myself together here, else it's going to be emotional, but maybe not as listenable. But that I think is key. And for me, that has been part of it, has been also finding out by being very open about my chaos. I've been able to help some other people not get that far. And that's been very motivating. It's been very motivating to tell people, hey, and I have people who are much worse off than me, right? I'm bad off financially, but could be worse, and I still have a decent life, and now some good things are happening. But remembering to give people a place where they can share their pain or make it okay to talk about the shitty stuff, because it's a good reminder that A, it's usually not that shitty, and there's usually some silver linings, and B, at least I'm not that guy, right?
Yeah.
Which is sounds terrible, but can be a very motivating thing, both for the person who is in the situation, who gets then to be all brave about it, and for the person saying, "Whew, okay, I need to start now."
Yeah. Thank you. Looking back with the 2020 hindsight, what are the things that you've identified that if you could go back in time, you'd change? Like if you were to drop you in 2016.
Oh, so many mistakes. So the first thing that I would change was I was a hardcore creative for many years. For many years, I was a creative, and I created a business and ran that. And I was the most businessy of us in our group, but I was not super businessy.
Yeah.
And I had offers of advice from people. I could have gone to, we were even big enough. We had an official partnership with Copenhagen Business School. Our logo was on their wall of partners. And we had students who made up example business plans for our company. And I didn't even look at them because I felt, oh, you don't know enough. Yeah. Oh, you don't understand, or we don't want to do this, or blah, blah, blah.
And were you convinced at the time that it was going well?
No.
Okay.
No, this was before this was even when I knew we needed help. I was just convinced that they didn't understand.
Yeah.
And the harsh reality is that the things they advised, I didn't want to do. Yeah. One of the things I do, because now I'm still a creative, but I'm now a very commercial creative. And that's been a huge strength, that I now speak fluent creative, but I also speak fluent business. And I did not 6 years ago. Hell no. Now I do. And what I find is that most people, and some of you out there listening may recognize this, most people, especially in creative spaces, they would rather spend 100 hours getting better at the craft. Whether it's building escape rooms, or polishing the tattoo art, or making the ice sculptures, or doing the dance, or whatever it is, then they'd spend 1 hour watching a YouTube video on how sales cycles work. Because one thing is this illusion that if we just get good enough at what we're doing, the rest will take care of it.
Yeah, build it and they'll come.
Which is true, but most of us don't get that far.
Yeah.
Because we run out of money, we run out of time. We would also like to go to France once in a while, and maybe we've got kids, and we're not willing to make the sacrifices needed to win by that strategy. So we need something else.
Yeah.
We need shortcuts. We need help. We might even not suffer from having a budget or a business plan or just asking. One of the questions I normally ask people when it comes to building businesses, how does money go from the customer's pocket into yours? Walk me through that journey. And then many of them, they don't know. And even if they know, they're like, good, what makes the customer decide to give you that money? Oh, they don't know.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so how are you going to replicate that? And they're like, yeah, maybe I should worry about that instead of making a better ice sculpture.
Yep.
Because most of them already make amazing ice sculptures. Most of them already make amazing escape rooms.
So tagging on to that, there's a lot to unpack here, but your last sentence, amazing escape rooms. So switching to Sherlock, my other company, we just went through that experience of working on our like opus, our most beautiful thing for objectively too long. And then we were paying. So we worked on this new escape room for 4 years, and we had incredibly high ambitions for it. Without the pandemic, it would have probably been 2.5 years. But anyway, we got to a point where it was June last year, a year ago now, and we'd been paying rent for that space, like 3,000 euros a month, for over a year by then, and the money just like was just about to run out. We bought ourselves a little bit of time with the pre-sale, but it's like we had to go through the birth canal. We had to open, warts and all, with a sense of embarrassment and anxiety about it not being ready. But then that metaphor of, well, I think my dad told me that children or babies are not born ready. Ideally, you need like 2 more months in the womb to actually be more equipped to wield the dangers of the outside world. But if you'd been given those 2 months, then you'd kill your mother because they you wouldn't fit through anymore. Or you just have to always do a cesarean. So that feeling of like, okay, we have to go through the birth canal unprepared now, and some consolation that every baby is underprepared as well. That yeah, it saved our asses. We would have been bankrupt a few months later.
Yeah.
And then yes, yeah, and it took months of tweaking after that. But by opening in September, when we did, we bought the privilege of being able to tweak it.
And I think one thing that's also worth thinking about here. I was recently in New York for the World Experience Summit, and there we visited a dead letter warehouse, which was essentially think of it like a bar, except that while they serve alcohol, but the real purpose of going there is conversation. And it has these small, really interesting spaces that are like nostalgic spaces from America. There's like a saloon or like an outdoor porch space and a camper van space. And it's quiet. It's not loud music. It's quiet and like ambient music feelings or like sounds. And then there are these letters lying around. And you don't know what it is. There's no explanation. You pick up a letter and it says, what makes you laugh? Or can you tell when people lie? And suddenly conversation starts between friends or between strangers. And it was powerful and it was simple. And we talked to the guys who'd opened that, and they'd started in immersive theater, and they wanted to do like theatrical performance. And they'd gotten this space and they created it, and then they did it, and it didn't work that well economically, and a lot of people didn't understand it, and it was artistic and ambitious. And then they did a slightly modified version, and that worked, but it got a bit overcomplicated, and then they almost ran out of money. They had to fire almost everybody. They said, let's open in March because then it's warm enough, we don't need heating, and it's still cold enough, people can be indoors. It was really down to that.
Wow.
Told us. And they not killed off, but they fired off all the staff who were the facilitators because they couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
So they just said, let's just leave these things in the rooms and it'll have to fix itself. And it worked much better. It was cheaper and it worked much better. And looking back from an outside perspective, it's pretty easy to see, yeah, the thing you've done now, your third iteration, is brilliant. It is bloody brilliant. And I hope they open many of these dead letter warehouses all over the world, or others copy the concept or something similar, because it was brilliant. But they only got there because they had to sacrifice their ambition because they needed to pay rent.
Yeah. Would you send back to yourself in 2016 or other creatives, as you've determined that many creatives aren't that sales savvy or oriented as much as perhaps they could be? Would you send back the advice to yourself there and others of expecting a larger margin, like having a larger margin financial buffer, or like aiming for not just like surviving as a company, but putting the bar higher.
I'd send back a long package. And one of the things I'd send back, I think the core thing, at the core of it all, many things, but at the core of it all is something I actually told Harley Hefford on this podcast.
Harley,
Yes, exactly. Another college,
fellow Dutchman now.
which is nice, right? Harley's been doing these amazing experiences for people and has built up a community. But he said he dislikes sales, or he disliked, I'll rather put it, he said he disliked sales because he thought that selling was icky. Selling was dirty. It was a necessary part that he didn't like. And then we talked through it. And then at some point he says, so I guess that what you're saying is if what I'm doing is something that is bringing joy to the world, making the world a bit better by existing, which I think it is, and people like it, then maybe trying to sell it to them is not mean and evil, but opening up opportunity that they can say yes or no to. Maybe sales is only evil if you're selling bullshit stuff.
There you go.
And I think that for many creatives, that fear of sales, that can I just do the thing and somebody else can sell it, it's everywhere, but it's especially in sales. Just let me do the thing and then somebody else can sell it. And as long as you're outsourcing that, you're extremely vulnerable. Any company that does not have a strong, one of the founders being a strong salesperson or learning that skill if they don't have it to begin with is going to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, for most of us, not all, but for most of us, somebody needs to tell other people, hey, this is a good idea. And sometimes some people come up with something that's just so brilliant that even if they hate sales, then it's still going to work. But we can't, as one of the leaders of the German general staff said in the mid-19th century, we can't wait for Napoleon. Military genius isn't around when you need it, so let's train some guys so they're decent when we don't have geniuses.
Cheers. I would also I personally tell my creative friends that it's not salesing, just be enthusiastic about what you do.
Bingo.
And then oftentimes that's already contagious enough.
Yes.
Because like people want to tag on to positivity. They want that positivity in their life. So if you are proud of what you do, I hope you are, and if you feel that there's, if you can just express your enthusiasm for it, and maybe in such a way that people can kind of picture themselves in that whole story, then that's often just enough.
It definitely helps, right? And I think to go back to that, what would advice I would give is one was that take that, stop feeling icky about the business side and start learning that. Because one of the things I found now, Klaus, 5 years after the crash, I love the commercial stuff. I love the business side of things. I get excited about that. One of the reasons I have this podcast is I basically ask people, come at me with a business problem. Yes, it could be personal, but usually it's somewhat business oriented, and I'll help you solve it because I like doing it. And I'm actually decent at it, I've found. And I didn't know that. And the first time I had a young Indian guy I was mentoring who wrote a post on LinkedIn saying, this is Klaus, blah, blah. He's the coolest commercial guy I've ever met. And I laughed because I'm not a commercial guy. And then afterwards, I realized I am now.
Yeah.
And leaning into that, I wish I'd done that earlier because we were doing things that were so good, so magical. Also some that weren't, but we were doing stuff that was insane. But it was just based on not a house of cards, but a house of sand, and not in like a cool Game of Thrones way where there's like maybe somebody in cool costumes stabbing the others, but more in like, this is just bad. And I wish I'd learned that. As I sometimes tell people, maybe I would have learned something from 500,000.
Yeah.
Maybe I didn't need, maybe I could have.
The full million.
Yeah, maybe that would have been enough, right?
Is it as identifiable as ticket prices of your old company needed to have been higher, costs needed to have been lower?
It's not even, it's even worse than that. One of the things we did, the old LARP company that I had was basically two things. One was it was an old company that did role playing as education, entertainment as a business to business thing that had been running for many years. And then in our free time, the same people together in nonprofits did role playing for fun.
Oh yeah.
And then we did an event, at a Polish castle, a Harry Potter event, and it was so well received and got worldwide media attention that we said maybe there's a chance to do role playing for its own sake. Role playing as art, as experience, right? The B2C role playing. And instead of saying, the smart person here would have said, okay, you've done that as a volunteer. What would this event look like if everybody got paid? If the graphic
Yep.
designer got paid and the orcs got paid and the professors and the whoever was there, what would it look like if everybody got paid? And then what's the budget? And then what's a good margin? And then now sell the ticket at that price.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't do that. We
Yep.
said instead, led by yours truly, said, well, people used to pay. They paid 180 euros for the volunteer event, which was crazy low. Maybe we can get them to pay double that. I was so attached to selling to the people I knew. I was attached to taking a volunteer community and slowly maturing it into being okay with some level of professional prices.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, we now have this magical thing. Okay, it says it needs, the ticket price needs to be 1,500 euros or 800 or 2.5, whatever it could have been. Then how do we sell to people who want to pay that? And we didn't do that because it felt more comfortable and less scary risking everything financially and trying to slowly massage a market into even being a market with all the warts that was, than saying, hey, we have a thing, let's find the people who want to buy it. It was like, we've now learned how to produce a Ferrari. And I have no shame about calling it a Ferrari. But instead of saying, okay, this Ferrari needs to be sold at 200,000 euros to be able to pay the engineers and the mechanics and etc., so we can build more, then we said, yeah, the last guy we sold a dune buggy to, he paid 50. So let's sell this Ferrari at 60, make a loss, and then next time at 70, and someday we'll get to 200.
Oh,
We never got to 200.
excruciating. Excruciating.
Yes, and I bankrolled the whole thing privately by borrowing money because I thought we can turn it around.
You get there.
I thought we can get there. If we can just get there, it'll be magical.
Yeah.
And we almost got there.
Oh.
And then we didn't.
Oh.
Yep.
Thank you for sharing.
Most welcome. Most welcome. And had we talked about where this was going in 2017, when I just lectured at Disney Imagineering in California, and there were talks about doing wild stuff, and there were projects and things, and then I would have said, I think we've finally broken, we've broken the back of the problem. Yes, we're down, but we're now starting to go up. Yeah, that wasn't true.
Yeah, you didn't know how down you were going to get.
No. And when the ironic part is we finally made it. We finally started going upwards. We finally broke the spiral and we're beginning to claw ourselves out of it. But by then confidence was gone and there were no more strings to pull. And even though I said, no, but now we've got it, it was too late. Too late.
Ouch.
And then it crashed.
Yeah, I can imagine. Switching, Disney, does it console you that Disney has gone through a somewhat comparable conundrum with Galactic Star Cruiser, going for the super high priced thing, trying to establish that market or discover that market, and not finding it in time for them to continue with it?
Ooh, the Disney Galactic Star Cruiser is a chapter of its own. I think I'll say a few things on it without getting into detail, but anybody who's curious can Google Disney Star Cruiser and my name, because I've written a few things on it that go a little bit more into depth. But I think, one, I'm glad it happened. I think it's really cool that a huge company like Disney took that chance. There are some design decisions that were taken that I thought, but we told you not to do it this way. But there are probably reasons we weren't aware of, right? There are reasons. There's always reasons you don't know when you're on the outside, but when you're on the inside, it's like, but the Chinese investors said we had to.
Oh, yeah.
And the other people outside are like, what Chinese investors? And you go, exactly. So I know that working on that from the inside was a huge undertaking, and it's easy to point fingers because you don't know the fingers you're pointing at. You don't know, was that just somebody being stupid or was it just unavoidable?
Yeah.
So that's one part. But the other part is that I think what they did, and for those who are curious, is they launched something and they branded it wrong. The fact that it was called the Star Wars Hotel meant that people looked at it and thought of it as a hotel with an add-on. They didn't, when we sold our events, we never called it a hotel. You went to a hotel. The castle we rented was the castles, we rented several, but they were hotels that we rented out completely and ran events at. But nobody talked about going to the Harry Potter hotel or going to the vampire hotel or whatever else we did. They talked about going to the event that just took place at a hotel. And I think one of the things Disney did wrong was they saw it too much as a hotel and too little as an event. And I think that meant people looked at it as a hotel, not as an event. And that meant they priced it, oh, this is an expensive hotel, even with cool experiences, instead of saying this is a transformative, once in a lifetime experience that just happens to take place inside a Star Cruiser that, by the way, functions like a hotel.
Yeah, you spend a night at.
Yeah.
All right.
And a little bit of it is one of the more expensive events in American sports is going to the Super Bowl, right? The National Football League, the championship, the biggest of the big, and tickets there are expensive. And when people say, I'm going to the Super Bowl, I'll happily pay $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 for a ticket.
Whoa.
Yeah, and some of the expensive ones are much more expensive. If you say, oh, but that's a very expensive chair for 4 hours.
Yeah.
But imagine you sold that, right? Imagine you have a sporting event like the NFL, and its pinnacle event, the top of the top, is the Super Bowl every year. Imagine if somebody sold seats at the Super Bowl like places where you can sit down for 5 hours. They're like, those are mighty expensive seats, my friend. But of course, nobody sells it that way, even though that's also true.
So framing killed. Do you ever think you'll go back into the LARP world, or is that fully behind you?
So I made 3 decisions when it all crashed down. One was I would get back to producing events that were, if not LARPs, then LARP-like.
Mm-hmm.
These insane immersive experiences that are 360 illusion, that are still, from what I've seen, it's still the wildest thing out there. There's immersive theater, there's VR, there's all sorts of beautiful things and amazing things. I've seen nothing that is as immersive or as transformative in the format as LARP, as live action role playing. I've seen, because it's fake reality. It's faking reality, and that is obviously pretty powerful. So I said I would get back into that, whether it would be as hardcore or whatever, who knows, but I would get back into that someday. I also told myself I'm not going to get back into it for the same people, because while I loved doing the events, I was glad to get out of parts of the community. There's a huge difference between community management and creating events. And the community management side was draining and exhausting, where the event stuff was fun and interesting. So if I did it again, I told myself I'd do it as something where people came and then they went home. And maybe you met them again, but they weren't suddenly a community that you had to manage. Because that was part of the problem, was we created community, and community is powerful and community is wonderful, but community is also full of explosive humans who disagree. And if they think you're to blame, then you'll get blamed both for the mistakes you make, and I made plenty, and the ones you didn't make, and the ones you wouldn't even dream of making, but nobody bothered to fact check. So that was the second promise. And the third one was, if I got back into that space, or when I do, it'll be with partners that have more distribution reach than I did then.
Yeah.
Because we were just doing direct global sales to people all over the world. That was tough. And it'll be with deeper pockets, either because of my own deeper pockets, which aren't really that deep at the moment, more like mountains rather than lakes, or it'll be with partners who say, you know what? You seem to know how to create magic. We can see the business in that. We'll risk the capital.
Yeah. I wish for you the second.
I hope so as well.
While also the first, but use the second, while also having some deeper pockets.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to share about this?
Oh, thanks for giving me that opportunity. I think one thing that, instead of sharing more, tempting as it is, and I could talk about this for a long time, I'm instead going to share a thing with you and then ask you a thing.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I want to share is I want to thank you. Not just for, as I usually do, bringing a problem to me. I usually thank people for that, which is very nice, but also for giving me an excuse to talk about something that both was and is a problem for me. So thank you for giving me that opportunity. I appreciate that. and also with all our listeners. The second thing is I want you, even though this has been a little bit of a meandering conversation, I want you to take a moment and think of 3 things you take away from this. And whether it's, oh my God, I'm glad I'm not Klaus, or it's something else, right? Take 3 things that you take away from this conversation that may or may not be useful or may or not be inspiring, but something you're going to remember tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, thank God I'm not in that position definitely is there. It's a relativizing power. It makes me kind of grateful for the relatively low stakes situation that we're in with the shutting down of our company. Definitely taking away just calling the different partners, and but mostly the first thing. I think that the grace with which you accepted the personal debt and are now on a halfway of a maybe 10-year project of paying all those people back. It gives me a sense of like, Victor, just cough up the 10K and or take some time to pay those parties. It's not $1 million.
It's not $1 million.
And even if it's and even if it is $1 million, you can accept it in the way that you described. So that's a very powerful takeaway. And also, I'll just repeat how I opened for myself is that it feels like I'm very grateful that this is happening now when Sherlock already launched that new thing, so that I have on the one hand a company that's kind of doing well or starting to do well. I hope, I'm knocking on wood, because we are entering the low season of summer, while and then giving a little bit of space for winding down something that is a sad thing, because we put a lot of care and love into it and it didn't fulfill the promise that we saw in it. And the main takeaways from it is all the learnings and experience that we built up. I'm just feeling that, and then also the wish to kind of wrap it up nicely with grace. There's that word again.
Thank you for those. For all of our listeners out there, this has been the Innovation Coaching Podcast. You've heard Victor Van Doorn and me, your host, Klaus Hostel. Thank you for listening.